Dankeschön, vielen lieben Dank. We're going to switch into English. Hello and welcome everybody to Reality Outpacing Fiction. We have the next hour where we want to dig into science fiction and AI topics from the perspective of Chinese author Chen Qiufan. Allow me to introduce him to you and another person who's going to be joining us on stage. So Chen Qiufan is an award-winning speculative science fiction writer. He's a translator, curator, and futurist. And in his literature, he explores issues of climate change, the environment and artificial intelligence, cybernetic society, and also considers how ancient non-dualistic philosophies can be incorporated into narrative frameworks for building a future-proof symbiotic society. His debut novel was Waist Tide, and he's also the co-author of a book called AI 2040, 10 Visions for Our Future, which I look forward to discussing with Chen Qiufan today. But the two of us, let's give you a big round of applause already. Join us on stage. Please, Chen. Lovely to have you here. We will not be alone on stage. There's another person joining us. He's a dear friend and colleague of mine, Uri Aviv, a science fiction evangelist and the founder and director of Utopia Tel Aviv International Film and Science Fiction Festival. He is also the co-curator of many tracks at Republica of the past years, where we looked at science fiction, how we can learn from science fiction in different ways, including tracks like Cancel the Apocalypse. And it's lovely to have you back. So please give Uri a big round of applause as well. All right. Uri, I believe, apart from the obvious reasons I just cited why it's great that we're doing this interview together, there's also a nice little anecdote about why it makes sense to have you and Stan. We're going to call you Stan for the rest of the interview, if that's okay. First name base. So there's a little anecdote why it makes sense for us to be together.
I should not be allowed next to or into bookstores because I devour them. And I follow Paulo Coelho's advice. A good bookshelf is like a medicine cabinet. It's not a requirement that you read everything all the time, but it's good to have something to go for. And last year was... so I remembered the name Chen Qiufan. And I saw this, AI 2041, and it was fascinating because I'm trying to get into short stories and into Chinese science fiction, and this was a collaboration, so I picked it up immediately and looked for the author. I'm sure he's here somewhere, and there he is.
So that was last year at Republica. You picked up his book, and this year at Republica, here we are together on stage. So, Stan, we want to learn a lot of things from you today, like I said, from your perspective on AI and your writing. But first, I would love to know, how did you get into all this? How did you end up as a science fiction author?
Thanks, Janine, and thanks, Uri, and thanks for having me here to Republica. I think especially excited about this year's theme, Gen XYZ. So many young people here, all the makers, all the creators here. Oh, I'm so thrilled to be part of it. And speaking of how I became a science fiction writer, also started from a kid. So I remember I started to read like Jules Verne's all classic science fiction, like 80 Days Around the World, blah, blah, all this. But I think my dad used to work for a science research institute who focusing on ultrasonic devices. So they have their library, a lot of like popular science and magazines, everything. And he brought me to their, working place. And I always delve into the, shelves full of sci-fi stories, and I think that's how I became like a fan first. And after a while, I realized, I should create my own world. I should write my own story, and that's how I started. I think around 10, 11 something, I write very short, like Star Wars-ish story and send it to my mom. And not like other Chinese parents. She's very encouraging, She didn't say, no, go back to your homework, do the do the everything. But she said, "Oh, this is something very good, very nice. You could do it." So this is how I get started, and I got my first story published when I was 16. So that was it's a huge positive feedback loop. I think just keep me going and trying until now. I'm so grateful that I get this luck, or I think the opportunity to get into this, genre.
Lovely. So we want to talk about different things. Of course, we want to talk about the book AI 2041 too. But before, we want to learn a little bit about your science fiction universe and learn a little bit more about science fiction in China, of course, too. I mean, we have been discussing different things at Republica over the last years, and especially not trying to see the future as like one singular thing, one straight path that we're all heading towards, but rather
the future is always the future is a plural. That's something I've learned over time through also futures research. It's futures research, and it's futures. And that's one thing science fiction enables us. And I wrote down a paragraph which you wrote even better. So there's this constant battle for the vision of the future. And that's one of the things, that it's a vision for futures. And science fiction enables us to glimpse different visions and different possibilities. And as you wrote, science fiction is capable of wedging open small possibilities to mend the torn generation. This is from 2017. To allow different visions and imagined future Chinas to exist in peace, to listen to one another, to reach consensus, and to proceed together. So, what does science fiction from China, and I know science fiction from China is also a rather big thing to handle. So what does it bring to the table in terms of visions of the future? How does it view the concept of the future? And through your expertise, how does it differ from Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking, westernized visions of the future?
Yeah, science fiction, even fiction or novel, is a Western genre or concept. So science fiction basically was introduced to China about 120 years ago by all those revolutionists. They tried to reform the society with science, as a tool, as a methodology, as a spirit. And back then, Lu Xun, the very most famous Chinese writers, so he translated A Journey to the Moon by Jules Verne into Chinese, and try to give people a sense what is imagination, what is science. But they fail, of course, very, very shortly. But I think this is sowing the seed into, Chinese culture and environment, everything. And so it's coming back and forth along with each, classical political, societal change. So I think the rapid science fiction in China blossom started from about 20 years ago. It actually came along with globalization. So globalization, and when internet, personal computer get into the family, and like my generation, I was born and raised in 80s. So we start to having all these devices, technology, and even Western storytellings like Star Wars, Star Trek, and all this animation. And we start to see the world in a different perspective. So I think this is quite interesting because we learn all this, genre storytelling from a Western, format. But there comes an identity crisis afterward because we've been asked, what is Chinese science fiction? What is the difference between Chinese science fiction with the, Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking science fiction or elsewhere science fiction? I might say, for now, we're still exploring what is our own identity or the characteristic feature of Chinese science fiction. Of course, you can say we use Chinese as a language. We write about China, characters, mythologies, culture, everything, and even the value. But what is so unique out there? What's new can we bring to the world? No matter it's like genre-wise, or even we can have some new kind of philosophy, for example. So this is what me and all my my writer friends, we're always discussing, okay, so what should we do? I think it's just a new emerging thing, very young in China. So I think this is something very exciting. Everything is new, so then we can do whatever we want.
Can I ask a follow-up? So could you give like one or two the what-if question, like that's the core of science fiction, and it might be a naive question, but it's a radical one. It can be a radical. Can you give us like a few examples from your own writing or from other, your colleagues that you like? What are the scenarios or what are the potential futures that they imagine?
Sure. Like I was in Torino book fair last week because I had an Italian anthology about Chinese cyberpunk stories coming out. So I selected a bunch of my favorite Chinese writers' cyberpunk story, including one from Han Song, which I like very much. It's talking about what if a robot wants to become Buddha. So it's like a robot working in the temple. So it's kind of basically doing all this daily practice and try to think about, the Buddha is about giving up itself. So it's realize everything is illusionary. So it's like trying very hard how to unlearn a lot of things. So this is very unique, right? This is something maybe you didn't see from the Western robot or AI story. So I like it very much. So I think it's very Chinese.
A robot trying to achieve nirvana.
Yes. Basically it. So that's fantastic, right? So I
want
it. Yeah. So this is something I really recommend. But it's in Italian, not in German yet. So.
Okay, I think we both have follow-up questions. I think that was a really lovely example. I have a double question because you said, you hang out and discuss, and that kind of gave me the image that maybe there's like a clique. Are you like a network of science fiction authors that all hang out together and exchange ideas? Is it a collaborative environment that you're working in? And maybe you can share some more of the maybe common themes, because in your bio it says you address like ecological issues and some, so what are the sort of
trends, maybe? Trends?
Yeah, the trends or the current problems that you're sort of addressing and seeing how to tackle from a science fiction perspective.
Yeah, I think in recent years I observed there are maybe several major themes emerging from Chinese science fiction. One is AI, of course. But it's very difficult right now after the LLM. So you can basically see a lot of like previous science fiction narratives about AI or robots basically invalid or irrelevant basically. So we have to think about what if the current LLM or like all these models, fundamental models evolve into the future. What does that look like? And I think this is one major theme I see a lot of writings. Another thing is climate change. Of course, this is now a very popular topic, but also how to combine with Chinese traditional, historic discourses, like all this mythology, all this folklogs from past, and how to reinterpret into climate change, new reality. So how to adapt with it.
And sorry, just one more follow-up on this for me. Is that then more in the context of Like there's a subgenre called solar punk. Is it more from that perspective, or are you dealing with like climate change topics? Is it more a dystopian take on things? And if I may also ask, what about like social topics? Is that something that features?
Yeah, of course. Like climate change fiction or Sci-Fi. So basically, we have different subgenres. Like something is one is like scaring people away. So it's like very dystopic scenario about the climate change future. And another thing I think is more hopeful, like solar punk or hope punk. So we try to create this optimistic, sustainable future imagination. But I think both, like most of the writers' works might lie in between. So it's like a mix of dystopian and also hopeful. And speaking of the social issues, I think recent years I can see a lot of discussion around psychological issues like mentality issues, like illness, mental health issues. So a lot of things discussing with technology. Maybe it's like exacerbate the situation, or either way, can we cure, can we heal the people with new kind of tools and technology? So this is, I think, also the reflection of reality in a way.
It's one of the themes that come up in a lot of the stories in AI 2041, and I question if COVID had an effect on the writing of sci-fi in that respect in China, about mental issues, about loneliness, about
of course,
isolation.
Yeah, as you might know, is maybe like writers, they use metaphors, They're not directly writing about the COVID, but they use metaphors, they use something else. Like I wrote a story about cats. Actually, it's about like cats during the COVID, because, the host is not at home because it was locked down somewhere, but the cat has to be alone, without food, without clean water. So it tried to make its way out. So it experienced the whole city, the empty city, and tried to find a place, try to find its master. So it's kind of, it's not a pure science fiction, but it's like a science fiction and fairy tale in between. But it's a bit sweet, but it's a bit horror. So I think, I don't know what it is, but yeah, different people have different
like when we try and put labels on things, it's mostly for marketing, and then you've got the actual story, and as long as it's a little off the grid from reality, then it's science fiction enough for me. Yeah.
We're going to start digging a bit deeper into the book that we just started talking about as well. I forgot to mention in the beginning that we do want to also open it up toward the end for your questions and comments, so we'll definitely make sure to leave some time for that as well. It's interesting to hear, because of course there are a lot of generalizations, of preconceptions regarding China and Western countries, and being very sort of ecologically aware, or perhaps very sensitive to the mental health issues of a population, and not the things that are sort of reported on mostly as things coming from China. And maybe as a more general question, looking at science fiction genre and how it's developing, and maybe you can both relate to this from your regional perspectives, let's say. I have been wondering, like I felt in the past years, Uri, when we have been curating these tracks on science fiction at Republica, there was a lot of focus on very dystopian narratives. Yeah, that's kind of what we've been seeing the last decade, very dystopian narratives. And in the recent years, I was wondering whether there's a slight shift towards the more sort of freakish, outlandish, absurdist, fantasy-based science fiction, in a way because we already live now in the sort of tech dystopian society that many were imagining over the past decades. Would you say there is a shift in global trends in science fiction, Uri?
For me, I'll shift over to cinema for a second, because we both have met for lunch at the Cannes Film Festival
Yeah, I forgot to
past
mention.
week.
It's a pre-hanging out at another conference
And
by accident.
every year there's some sub-genre that's trending. I remember there's been a wave of vampire films and zombie films, and now there was like a little bit of cannibalism. And this year's Cannes had several films, both in competition and in the market, that resonated. Like, they were about the HIV epidemic, AIDS, but they were actually about COVID, but they were actually about isolation and loneliness and the aspects of those of the disease and the plague that can be used as metaphor for other things. Yes, science fiction has been dwindling. There's fantasy is at an all-time high in terms of like literary success. I guess that's why it's all the much so important to create more and relevant and unique and complex and nuanced science fiction from all over. I'll say also that science fiction has, so it's two contradictory answers. One, science fiction uses really broad brushstrokes that may seem absurdist, but we talk about, humanity in 500 years. So you need to kind of project into the future, and will there be the Dune epic is supposedly, I think, 20,000 years in the future or something like that. So it's after the robot apocalypse. So there's that, and then you get back to very basic human traits that are just basic humanity. Then the other thing is very regional, very local sci-fi, and I know a little about a lot of places, but I know some things about Israel, having run, absurdly enough, a science fiction festival there for a long time. Science fiction authors or authors who utilize science fiction in Israel, although it's a technological, powerhouse, there's not a lot of technological, ethical dilemmas in science fiction in Israel. There's mostly fear, and the fear erupts in two ways. It's either alternative histories where the Israeli nation state does not exist, or dystopian / apocalyptic / post-apocalyptic stories where the nation of Israel no longer exists. So those are the two. So that's kind of a very regional, local trend.
I think fear was already a good keyword. I mean, there's of course a lot of things in there. Well, how can you relate? Okay, I've got a follow-up question to that in regard to the context of the book that we're going to start talking about in a minute. But maybe you can relate that back to China first. This general question about trends in science fiction, but also the motivating emotion.
I'd like just to say that Israel is a nation of 10 million people, give or take a few million. And how many?
1.4 billion.
So the second largest in the world, I hear. So the comparison, it's like...
Excuse my off-comparison.
No, but please.
No. Yeah, I mean, because I think we realize the reality is getting more complex right now, right? We're confronting polycrisis. It's always there, we just didn't see it in that way, right? So I was reading Golden Age sci-fi since kid, but oversimplify things and maybe over optimistic in a way. And besides the core idea, there's nothing left after years when you revisit the stories. So I think now we need something deeper. So I think, of course, there are different opinions in the market. So some are still like going with the very hardcore, hard sci-fi, whatsoever, golden age stuff. But me and my colleagues, and which I call them colleagues because we share the same vision about the future. We try to reinvent the genre in a way, so incorporate with more layers of narratives. Maybe something from the past, maybe something from a more metaphysical, metaphorical level of interpreting the reality. Of course, also because right now we're confronting a complex science, Everything is interdisciplinary, everything is interwoven together. So how can we find a new way to form, to reshape everything together, but still it's coherent, it's still emotionally effective. So it's a very difficult but challenging, but also very, worth effort-making, task for us.
I think it's really interesting. Let's hold that thought about how collaborative your work environment is for later in the conversation. Because now I want to start talking about AI 2041. I just said fear is a good keyword because according to statistics, the fear of the AI overlord is definitely something that is going around in German people's minds, especially from older generations these days. And I understand that is kind of different in China. Yeah, I would love to learn how, let's start a little bit, again, personal and perhaps anecdotal before we get into the core topics of the book. This is a collaborative work. How did it happen? Tell us a little bit about how this book came to be and your co-author, please.
Yeah, Dr. Qiufan is a very, famous tech tycoon, I think, like evangelist, investor, AI optimist, in China and worldwide. So we have slightly overlapping time working for Google back in the day, not anymore. So he reached out to me 2019, before COVID and before, ChatGPT, everything happened. So he said, okay, we should do a book together. Because he did write some books about AI superpower, but it's mostly for people in the tech industry and for the policymakers, everything, elite, maybe.
A non-fiction book.
Non-fiction, of course. He said we should blend science fiction for ordinary people who doesn't have the background on tech, who doesn't understand a bit about AI, and we should give them a hopeful version of future because all this bleak, negative imagination from sci-fi movies, Terminators, whatsoever. And first of all, I was hesitating a bit because he used to be my boss, right? Nobody wants to work with your ex-boss, right? You understand what I'm talking about. But after a while, I think this is something worth of my efforts because, like in my imagination, AI is not supposed to serve just for the elites or superpower countries, but supposed to be built, designed, and serve for everyone, right? As equal as possible, even if it's like too idealistic, maybe. But we should, use the storytelling to spread the words, even like telling the people, okay, all of the stories set in 10 different countries, 10 different cultures, different classes, and younger people, mostly as protagonists, even like non-binary people. Yeah, I think this is very important to help them see the potential in themselves, like how to incorporate with the technology, but not to diminish their human agency. This is what I try to emphasize. Of course, you different people read a book into different ideas. Some people think it's too optimistic, something is too, pessimistic, but I'll say it's a mix.
Oh, we've got questions for that. We want, that's one thing we were asking ourselves as well. But we'll get to that in a minute. Allow me a very quick side question, because in when we were getting to know you and about
Prep
the book,
talk.
prep work, with Google China, and we were like, what very naively, like, what do you do at Google China? Like, what does Google China do exactly?
Yeah, allow me to introduce a little bit of my educational background. I studied Chinese literature and film in Peking University, so basically nothing to do with tech. But I'm always so into tech and science since kid. So I found myself a position as, online advertising. Online advertisements, so, all these clicks across the social medias, so making a little bit of money. So basically, I work as an account manager, so to talk to different people, to tell them, okay, what is the technology behind this product, how it can monetize your traffic, blah, blah, blah. I see the similarity between my job and science fiction writing. So this is, so I think everything, you just need to connect the dots, right? You use the job skill and put it into your writing, and also use your writing to promote your products. Just the same thing in two different perspectives.
Cool. Thank you. So we kind of learned that it was kind of like an economic liaison office for Google in China for Chinese companies that want to do things Google in the West. Thank you for that. So there you have, the book is set up so that it's a short story, a fictional short story, and then following that sort of a more technical explanation of what happens in that story. And that's the structure of the book. So we were wondering, at least from a Western perspective, some of the stories have a kind of a Black Mirror vibe, if I may say so. If that was like the intention, like what did you want the readers to feel and to have, like, stick with them from the fictional part of the book?
Yeah, it's true. I was a Black Mirror fan for the first 3 seasons when it's still British in a way. I'm not a fan when it moved to Netflix, and I didn't check the recent 7th one yet, but I heard it's not good, right? I saw the face here. Yeah. So to me, I think we try to have the readers see the complexity in the scenarios, right? Like each scenario, like contain different layers of narratives, like technology, of course, society, of course, culture, of course, and something human, I think the human part is what I try to emphasize. And I think the human part is what holds all the layers together, because we try to encourage the people not to be afraid of the technology such as AI, because new technology comes and goes every other, decades. But people who can adapt to changes, they can survive and they can evolve with technology. So I think this is something you couldn't resist. As a Chinese, I always say sometimes Chinese are too open without any hesitation to embrace the new changes. I think it's not 100% positive in my perspective. You have to hold back a little bit, just like here. You need to rethink about a lot of things, like ethics,
I do want to comment that, yes, we've discussed this, we both and the three of us, the Black Mirror-ish of some of the stories, but I've gone back and thought about it, and Black Mirror is very dark, and that's at various episodes it's a good thing, and there's obviously magnificent episodes, and there's a lot of sadness and humanity there too, but I think your stories include a lot of ambiguity, and which makes them which is different than Black Mirror. I just wanted to put that out there so anyone who's not read it yet don't receive the wrong impression.
Yeah, I think it's good to point out there's a lot of ambiguity, which I'm sure was intended as well. What we also,
all bad.
what we also asked ourselves is, how did you go about selecting the locations for the stories? So each story is set in a different place, right? And they're sometimes quite specific cultural settings as well, I would say. Like, for instance, one story is called Gods Behind the Mask, and you tell the story of this young Nigerian deepfake video hacker who was hired for the kind of political hit job, but eventually decides to go against his client, and we won't spoil everything now, but there's a lot of references that are quite specific to Nigerian culture and some heritage topics like mask wearing, for instance, and things like that. How did you go about selecting the locations for the stories in your book?
The curatorial process, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So because I've been to not all of the countries in the book, but maybe like 80%. So
Nigeria, Germany, the US, South Korea, Japan, China, Doha, Qatar, Germany, Munich.
Yeah.
And Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
And India.
India. Yeah. So I think there's a map somewhere in my head. And when I came up with this idea, because first I discussed with Kai-Fu Lee, we package all these technologies of AI into small packs. So maybe this is for AI insurance, this is for deepfake, this is for autonomous vehicle, etc., etc. So each one I try to find the most relevant culture metaphor or symbols which can be attached. So, for example, the AI insurance one, I attach with the India, the caste system.
The caste system in India.
The caste system, of course, legally is banned, is forbidden, but you can see is deeply embedded in their culture, language, social structure, etc. So all this hidden reality will be revealed and emphasized by AI algorithm in the future. So this is deeply connected and in a coherent way. So I try to find all this interconnection between all these seems fractal elements and build it as a whole structure. Sometimes you need a little bit of, I don't know where it came from, but it's kind of, a flash of light. So it's like epiphany. It just pop up, and you think, oh, this is the thing, like the fake one from Nigeria, because the gay boy from Nigeria, he suffered from the identity crisis because Nigeria still like forbidden, same-sex marriage for quite a long time until now. And also they have the tradition of this kind of like filmmaking in a very low cost, and which can attach to the skill set of the boy. And also there's some myth and folklores and symbols in the culture which can perfectly incorporate with the storytelling. So I think this is a systematic, process. But sometimes I think it's a muscle memory. When you write, enough amount of stories, you build up this kind of, thinking process, and you know where to find all these things and put them all together.
I mean, there's so much to learn more about the research process and how you did that. But go ahead.
I want to ask exactly about that, because when you talk about when you write a foundation series like Asimov or Dune, or when you do Kim Stanley Robinson and you shoot out into the 23, 24, 26, 2800s, then you can dispense of a lot of things. But when you do 2041 and you set the stories in so many different locations, and you go in depth into so many cultural, local histories. You need a team of researchers. What's going on?
We actually have a team. Yeah, we have a team to manage all the docs and all the research, and we had interview, we had like discussion with all the professions. And I think also we have to keep the nuance of each culture, and we try not to appropriate the culture and the experience, and we try to fact check everything with the local people, local friends, and I think it was quite a journey. To be honest, it's not easy. It's easier if I put all the story in China or US, right? But what's the point, right? So it's not for everyone. So people read, oh, it's another Chinese story, or it's another American science fiction. There's no point of making it. I think it's supposed to be written in this way. Not for all the country, of course, but you can see the diversity, you can see the spectrum of the diversity there.
May I?
Yeah, please.
So there's there's a 180 between being so global and open and telling regional and local stories. How would you say you bring the Chinese or your own perspective from China, or do you do that, or you try not to do that? Like what is your reflection or insight about telling a story in another culture, but from your own eyes?
Yeah, that's a very good one. Refer to my first novel, my debut novel, Waste Tie, and it was
out there for
yeah, English one, and it was written back in 2013. It's about a small village very close to my hometown, southern China, and it is dealing with all this electronic waste recycling, ship it from developed country like US, UK, Canada, elsewhere of the world. So it's causing a lot of environmental problem, like the soil, the air, the water, even the people's, their blood have very high level of lead. So cancer as well. So I turned it into a near future sci-fi thriller about, cyborg, environmental crisis, also like a revolution, like, in a smaller scale. So why did I put it into a sci-fi, even it's based on a real location and real scenario? I think because it's not a local issue. Basically, e-waste is a global issue, if you understand what I'm talking about. It shipped from the developed countries, and it was dumped in a developing country or area. And of course, all this technology was invented in Silicon Valley and designed in California, but manufactured in China or Southeast Asia countries. But when the things get retired, they ship all this waste elsewhere in someone else's backyard, because not in my backyard principle, right? So this is the closed loop. So if you see the things in the global scale, you'll see, oh, this is fuck. And this is not only happening in China, because when China stopped imported all this foreign waste in 2018, which means some other countries like Philippines, India, South Africa, they have to take care of all this waste. So which means if I put it in a non-fictional way, people say, oh, this is a China issue. It's not about us. But when you put it into a science fiction, you see, oh, this is relevant to everyone. I got a lot of feedback from other countries. Oh, they read the book and they said, this is basically my home. This is basically what happened in our country, in our land, in our people.
The power of metaphor. So one last one. And you've kind of brought this up, or we're discussing this. This is a book so global. So you've been on several tours and met audiences in numerous places. Where have you been, and how did different audiences react to the stories about their future, your stories about their future?
Yeah, is it received differently in different places?
But different.
Yeah, very interesting. I think my book was well accepted in many countries, but people read it in different ways. For example, in European countries, I think people accept it as a cautious tales. Mostly, they see the dystopian part of it. And in U.S., people, like academic people, might accusing me I'm, pro tech companies.
Tell us who was angry.
Yeah.
Don't specifically, but who was,
I'm not gonna name them, but they wrote an article on LA Book Review, and they're attacking me. Oh, you're pro tech companies, you're pro tech tyrants, and blah blah blah. So I said, okay, let's start a conversation. So we actually did a conversation online, having a debate. So I think, yeah, it's quite interesting. People see it in different ways, but I think in China or East Asia country, they see it more optimistic future. They say, oh, we can do a lot of things with AI, and they see the possibilities.
It's very interesting for me to hear, because in a way the more kind of technical commentary of the chapters then caused more reaction, emotional reaction that you just explained, than the narratives themselves. One more question from me, and then I want to open it up for you guys. There's a myriad of different sort of near-future realities being presented, and some of them share a more decentralized vision of AI than the one that we currently have, and the one that is currently also being promoted by the US or China in terms of like infrastructure or decentralization, computing power around the world, topics like that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that future vision of perhaps a more open source or a more decentralized AI world. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely I'm a fan for decentralization, and I think the distributed AI should be the alternative solution rather than we just have several, like 3 or 5 models, like dominant by US or China companies. And I think this is what EU, Europe should invest, to build up some diversified models, AI technology algorithm to counterbalance the status quo, which is so important because we talk about regulation, we talk about AI ethics, everything, but we have to do something. We have to build something decided by ourselves, right? So EU, we don't have the AI infrastructure from data level to algorithm level to application level, even to the storage level like the clouds. So this is what we're lacking here. We need to do something. Otherwise, it's just out of the game to be seriously. So I think the hope is here.
I mean, I'd love to ask a ton more questions also on the future of EU-China collaborations and everything, but we want to open it up now. So if you've got a question or a comment, then please give us a sign of hand. And, many. Okay, let's do this arch of people here. Maybe we'll collect 2 or 3. The lady here in the front, maybe. First, and all 3. We'll take all 3 of your hands going up.
No, it's a quick one. Just the question of the session: is reality outpacing?
Your name, please.
Sorry, Carsten Rossi.
Don't do that. We don't.
So, Carsten, just Carsten. That's fine. Just the question of the session: is reality outpacing fiction, which means is the polycrisis making the creative process easier or more difficult?
More difficult. Yeah, I think because we intend to think in a linear manner, but the reality is not happening in a linear way, right? So it's overlapping, it's all at once, yeah.
Did you raise your hand?
Yes. What role does science fiction play in initiating public discourse about the ethical implication of emerging technology in Chinese society?
I'm sorry. Can you say that again? I don't think we got that.
So,
Because of the claps.
what role does science fiction play in initiating public discourse about the ethical implication of emerging technology in Chinese society?
Thank you. So what role is science fiction playing in the general ethical public discourse on the role of technology in society in China?
I think that's a very good one because recent years I've been involved into a lot of discussion organized by the government and also tech company and academic institution. They see the potential in science fiction because we raise a lot of questions rather than giving a accurate confirmed answer. So they see something they didn't think of before, like speaking of AI ethic and maybe elders carrying maybe like information, like affection, relationship with AI and robots. So they just started this kind of interdisciplinary conversation from science fiction writers to thinkers to like scholars, even to policymakers. So they try to understand what is going on really and what should we think, maybe one step or two steps ahead of the reality, which is very difficult, of course. But think about our policy always chasing after the reality, after the tech, right? So tech first, and then later the all this legalization and policy catch up. But we try to think ahead. That's what futurist, futurology means.
Okay, yeah, it seems like in China is a social behavior point system, and that sounds a little bit like science fiction to me. And I was wondering, how do people in China feel about it? More utopian or dystopian or what at all?
I think just like elsewhere in the world, it's a mix. So it depends on what kind of niche you're staying in the ecosystem. So I think there's a lot of critic, system here and there. Like Amazon, they have their critic, system as well. So I think it's more important. Do we have the legalization? Do we have the law enforcement and regulation to protect the rights? Right. So I think in recent years, China has been, working very hard because I have friends, I have classmates working on legalization of AI and technology. And last year, actually, they published something in Shenzhen. So that's the Chinese way to doing that, starting from an experimental area, like specific city like Shenzhen or Hangzhou. And after the experiment, they see the result and they promote it elsewhere. So step by step, we started already. Yeah, so this is...
You mean Shenzhen being a special economic zone? That's
Yes.
what you meant. And there are 4 economic, right? That's
Yes.
Hi. Is this on? Okay, hi. I wanted to ask about what some of the challenges were in the process of writing the book, since you have such a large breadth of aspects of topics and issues that you cover in regard to dystopian and utopian futures. Because you mentioned some of the research process was quite difficult. I imagine there must have been some other challenges along the way. And how did you overcome them?
True. I think the biggest challenge is about the time. So because we put it as 20 years ahead of our time, so which means a lot of our readers can witness everything within their lifespan, which could be real, which could be false, right? So basically will be slapped on the face when the book came out. But I think when we try to catch the accuracy of how technology evolved, like such as specific algorithm like GAN, the GAN, right? But basically we couldn't do it, and after a year, it was replaced by diffusion model. So, but we make it right when we try to predict, a broader sense, humanity and social change and mobilization. I think we make it right because it's more stable, We didn't change a lot since caveman time, right? So humanity. So I think this is quite interesting. Like which make me reflect what is science fiction really about. It's not about science or technology, it's about science and human, and what is the punctuation, what is the tension in between. So it's the space. So it's the possibility, it's the reaction and interaction.
I'd like to just offer that the moniker science fiction is really confusing because it's not scientific fiction and it's not fiction about science, it's something completely different. And yeah, we need to handle that somehow.
We've got time for one more.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. Thanks for the very great session. I'm really interested how you do write. What environments do you prefer? Do you rely heavily on tech support, or do you have some paper and a pen, or does this vary, or how do you write your books?
And I'll add, what is your relationship with AI?
Right.
You also teach.
Yeah, I teach in the university on creative writing. So because a lot of students right now using AI to submit some work, but you can tell if you read carefully enough, right? So I think this is a big challenge. I use mix. Basically, I carry my notebook, like handwriting. So I put down my ideas, but in a very non-linear way, you know. But also I put down a lot of things on my laptop as well. I even do voice recording. When I woke up from a dream, you try to put it down, but you couldn't write it because writing is linear. You have to use your voice. And after a while, I would categorize all these random thoughts into different themes, different columns, different package, and try to connect the dots. Of course, and back to the AI question, I started experiment writing, collaborating with AI since 2017 when Google, launched Attention is All You Need and Transformers, and I tried different models, different things, and now I think it's not there yet. So now I try to encourage my students with my methodology, like deep writing, how you write deeper, how you think deeper, and how you feel deeper. I think it's very important. People getting more and more superficial, they want stimulation by all these TikTok things, and it's super quick and nothing left, basically. But we have to remain something as memory, as experience, embodiedly, right? So how can we train our sensory system, our writing and thinking and feeling into a next level? So I think this is very challenging, but this is what a writer should do. Yeah, so this is my answer.
Thank you. I saw some more hands go up, but unfortunately we're not going to have time to take more questions. But the good thing is that once the session ends in just a couple of minutes, we will be able to find you at the book desk that we have, which is right in the front of the main hall here. So by the main entrance of the main hall, just to your left, there's a book desk there, and you shall be there for a book signing, and people who didn't get a chance to ask their question now can find you there and have a chat, right?
Dankeschön.
So before we let you go there, just tell us what's next for you, Stan. What are you working on currently? What do we have to look forward to?
Yeah, I'm working on several books for kids. So I think kids are the ones we should really care about, like Gen X, Y, Z. So what kind of future we want them to imagine? And that's the version we want them to create. So I'm working on several books about like future, symbiotic future, blending technology as well as like ancient wisdom, traditions, and knowledge. So I think this is something I'm working on. And also my next novel is coming out very soon. It's about oceanic climate change. So there's loosely attached to the previous waste tie, also about waste, but in a digital way. So also the plastic in the ocean and biodiversity, everything. Yeah, so it's coming out very soon.
We look forward to reading and hopefully having you back at Republica sometime.
Thank you.
Big thank you,
so much.
Uri. And a
Dankeschön.
big thank you, Stan,
Thank
for being
you.
here. Thank you all for coming. Have a great day at Republica.